Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today is pretty laser focused, but the landscape we're about to enter is just vast and dynamic. We are plunging into the dynamic, sometimes confusing, but always fascinating psychosocial world of the 6 to 11-year-old child.
Hmm,
This period, which we call middle childhood in developmental terms, is really where the social stakes get raised dramatically.
they really do.
And the child begins that serious work of defining their own self-worth.
This is truly a high leverage time in development. If you want to understand where adult competency, confidence, resilience, where all that originates, you have to look right here.
It all starts here.
It does. This entire period is defined by the child's intense, culturally driven attempt to master valued skills.
Right.
And that could be anything academic, artistic, athletic. The central conflict, is one of self-definition. The child is constantly trying to figure out, often very publicly, are they industrious or are they inferior?
Competent or incompetent.
Exactly. It's the critical foundation-laying stage that really defines the approach they will take toward challenge for years and years to come.
And to guide us through this really complex psychological and social landscape, we have some fantastic research slides. They cover everything from, the deep insights of Erikson's crisis and strategies for building resilience, all the way to the nuances of family environments, the burgeoning power of peer culture,
And moral reasoning. Can't forget that.
and the critical development of moral reasoning, absolutely. So we're going to distill the essential insights that make this phase so unique. Let's unpack this immediately, starting with the inner world.
Hmm.
How does a child even start to internalize and measure their own worth during these foundational years?
It's the perfect place to start. We begin, fittingly, with that internal struggle that characterizes this entire stage. And, that means starting with Erikson.
Exactly. We're talking about Erikson's fourth psychosocial crisis, industry versus inferiority. And this isn't just a concept from a textbook. It's the emotional reality of middle childhood.
It is. It's characterized by this constant tension between productivity, that feeling of being useful and capable, and, the haunting specter of incompetence.
Right.
Children are suddenly deeply intrinsically invested in doing things well. They want mastery.
Yeah, you see it all the time.
You do. A kid might spend hours just trying to perfect a free throw, or tirelessly memorizing state capitals, or spend all their free time trying to figure out how to build the most complex structure in Minecraft.
Right.
That feeling of industry, of being productive, useful, and successful in mastering some kind of cultural tool, that's the goal. And it's absolutely critical for their self-image.
And this is where it gets so intensely social, right? It's a radical shift from those earlier, more egocentric stages.
Complete.
Self-pride suddenly depends not just on the child's actual accomplishments. That's only half the equation.
And frankly, sometimes it's the smaller half.
Exactly. It depends critically on how others, especially their peers and their teachers, view those accomplishments. It's no longer enough just to read a chapter. The question becomes, am I reading faster than my classmate? Did the teacher call my art the best?
That external validation is the new high-octane fuel for their emotional engine. It's everything.
So success in this stage is what really lays the groundwork for a growth mindset.
It's essential for it. What we now call a positive growth mindset, that understanding that effort and strategy, not just innate talent, lead to skill acquisition. That's born right here.
And the flip side.
Well, if a child repeatedly receives feedback that their effort is insufficient or incompetent, they retreat into inferiority. They start believing effort is pointless. Why try?
This stage also brings a significant leap in autonomy, which I find fascinating. Children between 6 and 11 aren't just more capable physically.
No, not at all.
They're capable of developing what some researchers call a secret life. They're learning to care for themselves, packing their own lunch, managing homework.
All those little things.
And notably, they often engage in activities or conversations without their parents' full awareness or explicit approval. They start testing the boundaries of independence.
Which is necessary for industry. They have to.
Yeah.
But it also means parents have a less direct view of their social and emotional world than they did just a year or two before.
Okay, so that increasing social awareness and this drive for autonomy, it must drive a huge cognitive shift in how they see themselves.
It does. The data reveals that in middle childhood, self-concept moves from these simple, absolute statements to nuanced, complex, and logical assessments.
So a 4-year-old might just say, I am smart.
Right. Simple, absolute. But an 8-year-old will say something much more detailed. I am good at math, but I struggle with reading. and I study hardest for science because I want to impress Mrs. Rodriguez.
That's a huge
That's
difference.
a world of difference.
And that complexity arises because they've unlocked the crucial mechanism of, what is it, social comparison.
Social comparison.
Yeah.
Before this stage, their self-view was internal and absolute. Now everything is relative to the group. Everything.
And middle childhood is just prime time for this comparison mechanism to kick in.
It's on all the time. They're constantly scanning the environment to see where they rank, who's better, who's worse, where do I fit.
The sources have this really wonderful, vivid illustration of this mechanism, and it's so simple. It focuses on the playground, specifically around swinging.
It's a perfect microcosm of immediate social influence.
It really is. If you observe a group of school-aged children, you'll notice they quickly adopt novel, complex, or challenging behaviors on the equipment. Swinging is done standing up, or on your belly, or twisted, or even head down.
But here's the crucial part.
Hmm.
They do it if someone else does it that way.
Yes. The behavior is immediately modeled and adopted, not because the child spontaneously decided to innovate, but because they are constantly measuring their actions and daring themselves to meet that peer standard.
It shows the behavioral influence of social comparison is just immediate and overwhelming.
But that impulse to compare, it needs to be managed, right? It can be destructive.
It absolutely needs management.
Mm-hmm.
And the research points to the role of effortful control here, which is essential for managing behavior and self-perception.
Define that for us. What is effortful control?
It's the child's ability to regulate their impulses, to suppress a dominant response, and to focus their attention despite distraction. It's the executive function in their brain that says,
Okay, James beat me in the race.
exactly. But instead of throwing a tantrum or quitting, I'm going to concentrate on practicing my starts tomorrow.
So effortful control is basically the mental muscle needed to turn the sting of social comparison into the drive for industry.
Rather than letting it devolve into inferiority. That makes perfect sense. You've got it.
And what does the trajectory of self-esteem look like across this age group? Does it just plummet because of all this comparison?
You'd think so, but no. The general cultural trend noted in the research is that self-esteem actually tends to increase during middle childhood.
That's surprising.
It is. It then stabilizes or sometimes dips a bit in adolescence when things get socially and physically choppy, and then it increases again in emerging adulthood.
So that increase in middle childhood suggests that, for the average child at least, they're successfully navigating this industry crisis.
For the most part, yes. They are mastering skills and finding productive niches.
And I'd guess that's probably because they are still sheltered enough that their comparisons, while always present, aren't completely devastating or defining just yet.
That's a good way to put it.
That's better.
And that successful navigation is significantly aided by realistic self-perception.
Meaning?
Well, both academic and social competence are supported by children who have a balanced view of their skills. Kids who are overly optimistic or completely deluded about their abilities.
Often inflated by parents who shield them from any negative feedback.
Yes. They tend to struggle more because they are not motivated to apply the effort needed for true industry.
So realism is key.
Realism, coupled with the belief in effort, that growth mindset we talked about, that's the key. Of course, culture influences exactly what skills are valued and how self-perception is communicated, but that need for realistic self-assessment remains universal.
Okay, so the foundation of self-worth is being built through industry and social comparison. But what happens when that foundation is hit by external stress? Whether it's a major event or just the daily grind of life. Let's move to section 2 and talk about resilience and the crucial factors that build it up or tear it down.
Resilience is a term that gets thrown around in casual conversation a lot.
All the time.
But in our sources, it has a precise tripartite definition. It is the capacity to adapt well to significant adversity and overcome serious stress.
So it's not about avoiding problems.
No, it's about adapting positively to them.
The sources break it down into 3 core components. First, resilience is dynamic.
Right, it is not a fixed trait.
Meaning you're not just resilient or not resilient.
Exactly. You might be resilient to a financial setback one year, but vulnerable to a social stressor the next. It changes based on circumstance, your developmental stage, and your support systems.
Okay, and the second component?
It must be a positive adaptation to stress. A child surviving a difficult situation by withdrawing completely or by becoming emotionally numb is adapting, sure, but it isn't positive resilience.
So resilience requires maintaining competence and psychological well-being.
Yes. And third, the adversity faced must be significant. We're talking about serious, life-altering stress factors, not just, a bad day at school.
This concept of resilience also brings up the idea of differential sensitivity.
Mhm.
That is, individuals react to stress and adversity wildly differently.
Think of it like this. Some children are like sponges. They just absorb and react intensely to stress, while others are more like Teflon, letting it slide right off, relatively unharmed.
And that highlights how the environment interacts uniquely with each child's own genetic makeup and temperament.
It does. A highly sensitive child might be totally derailed by a seemingly minor disruption, like a change in their after-school care routine.
While another kid might just see it as a minor annoyance.
Right. So resilience isn't about eliminating stress. It's about recognizing the differential ways children process it and hopefully cope with it.
And here is where the research offers a really surprising, almost paradoxical insight regarding stress. It's one that I think educators and parents really need to internalize.
This is one of the most critical takeaways from the entire deep dive. We tend to focus on the big, isolated events, a terrible family trauma, a natural disaster, a singular diagnosis.
The big shock events.
Exactly. However, the sources make it crystal clear that accumulated stresses over time, even seemingly minor, daily ones, what we call repeated stress, are often more devastating to a child's long-term development than an isolated major stress event.
Why is that? Why does the slow drip of repeated stress, this constant low-level instability, break resilience more effectively than a sudden overwhelming shock? That seems counterintuitive.
It comes down to physiological and psychological resource depletion. Repeated stress makes resilience incredibly difficult to maintain because the child's system never gets a chance to recover.
It can't reset.
It never gets to reset and build adaptation skills. Physiologically, their stress response system, the HPA axis, is constantly activated, leading to something called high allostatic load. They're always on high alert.
They never get back to zero.
Never. The body and mind interpret constant instability as a chronic threat, and that leaves the child unable to apply the necessary focus and effort for industry.
So the foundation of stability, which that 6 to 11-year-old so desperately needs to feel competent, is just eroded daily.
Exactly. And the examples cited in the research are so common. Frequent moves leading to constant school changes, cycling through multiple caregivers, or just continuous low-grade parental conflict.
Each one alone is manageable.
Right. But stacked up year after year, the child's ability to cope is fundamentally broken.
So if they are under this destructive cumulative stress, how do children try to compensate or adapt? I mean, even if it's harmful to them, what strategies do they develop?
Well, the research highlights a few cognitive coping measures that children use to reduce the immediate impact of that repeated stress. One of the most powerful strategies is the child's interpretation of the situation, or, a cognitive reframing, how they make sense of their family situation or their trauma. That matters greatly in reducing its hold over them.
And we mentioned a specific and often really problematic coping interpretation in the outline, parentification.
Right.
This is a pretty severe form of role reversal.
It is. Parentification is a specific coping interpretation where the child takes on adult roles within the family in an attempt to stabilize the system.
And there are two main forms, right?
Yes, there's instrumental parentification where the child takes on practical tasks, caring for younger siblings, cooking, managing household bills, even translating for parents.
And then the emotional kind.
And emotional parentification, where the child acts as the emotional confidant, the mediator, or the emotional anchor for an adult parent who is struggling.
And while that might provide some short-term stability for the family, the laundry gets done, the parent feels supported, it fundamentally sabotages the child's own developmental tasks.
Completely. They are forced to be industrious in adult ways before they are cognitively or emotionally ready.
Which prevents them from focusing on their age-appropriate social and academic competency.
And that's the tragedy of it. The child gets praise for being so responsible, but they lose the opportunity to play, to learn social skills with peers, and to focus on school achievement.
Which just increases their sense of inferiority in that crucial industry domain.
Exactly.
Okay, so aside from that kind of internal reframing, external supports must become absolutely essential.
They do. If the home is unstable, the non-shared environment has to step up.
Meaning friends, school.
Absolutely. Developing friends, acquiring skills outside the home, and participating in what we call structured involvement are vital aids to coping and resilience.
So after-school clubs, sports teams.
All of it. The sources strongly emphasize that participation in activities, school success, after-school clubs community programs, church provides a vital framework. This external structure offers stability, consistent expectations, positive adult role models, and a sense of competence, that feeling of industry that might be completely missing in a turbulent home environment.
So it's literally a resilience buffer.
It is a very powerful one.
That brings us directly to the family. The home environment is clearly central to both industry and resilience, but, I mean, families look vastly different today than they used to.
Oh, absolutely.
So when we analyze the success of a home, we have to move past these superficial appearances and distinguish between what the family looks like and how it operates.
That's the key distinction.
Let's dive into that critical distinction between structure and function.
In research, we define these pretty strictly. Family structure is the legal and genetic relationships among relatives living in the same home.
So it's just this simple description, who is in the house.
Right. Is it a nuclear family, a single-parent family, an extended family, a step family? It's just the blueprint.
And then we have family function, which is the mechanism.
Exactly. Function is simply the way a family works to meet the needs of its members. The structure can be anything, but if the function is failing, the child suffers.
And the data is clear on this, right? Function is way more critical.
Far more critical in determining the child's well-being than structure. No contest.
So to measure success, the sources list 6 key functions that families absolutely must provide during middle childhood. These are the non-negotiables.
They are. First, basic material necessities. Ensuring the child is fed, clothed, and sheltered. That directly reduces stress.
Number 2.
Encouragement for learning. This means supporting academic work, fostering curiosity, and emphasizing effort over inherent ability. This directly supports that industry crisis we talked about.
Okay, what else?
Third, help in developing self-respect, providing unconditional positive regard, recognizing achievements, which buckers against feelings of inferiority from all that social comparison.
And it's not just about the child in isolation.
No. Fourth is nurturing friendships, actively supporting the child's expanding social world, facilitating play dates, modeling healthy social interaction,
And 5th.
fostering harmony and stability, providing a predictable, low-conflict environment, which is the complete antithesis of that damaging cumulative stress.
And the 6th one is about adapting.
Yes, the family has to adapt to meet the changing needs of its members as they age.
Those 6 points are so comprehensive. They cover the child's physical, educational, emotional, and social needs.
They do.
And if those functions are met, a single-parent family can absolutely outperform a nuclear family.
Oh, easily. If the former is stable and the latter is high conflict, it's not even a question. Function trumps structure every time.
Okay, let's talk about environmental influences. When we talk about how nurture works in the home, we have to first acknowledge the power of genetics, right?
We do. Genes affect half or more of the variance for almost every trait. From intelligence to temperament, nature is always there. But environmental influence is where the big shift occurs in middle childhood.
And we tend to think of the shared environment, children raised by the same parents in the same home, as the main source of nurture, the great equalizer.
And this is the critical insight from the research, that influence shrinks with age.
It shrinks.
Yes, the environment inside the house becomes less predictive of the child's ultimate outcome. Conversely, the effect of the non-shared environment, which includes peers, friends, individual teacher-specific after-school experiences, that actually increases dramatically during middle childhood.
So children raised in the same house by the same parents do not necessarily share the same home environment. It's a complex idea.
It is, and it requires specific examples. Let's use a family upheaval like a move or a divorce. Parents respond to each child differently based on that child's personality, age, or gender. That's non-shared. But the event itself is also experienced in a non-shared way.
How so?
Well, consider a family that moves across the country. The 6-year-old might experience the loss primarily as the loss of a specific classroom or a comforting neighborhood routine.
Okay.
But the 11-year-old, however, loses an established peer culture, the status they had built over 5 years, and the critical social foundation they needed for their sense of industry.
So same move, completely different psychological experience.
Completely different, and that's the non-shared environment. It explains why siblings from the same home can have wildly different outcomes, temperaments, and interests.
Because the world treats them differently, they react to their parents differently, and they seek out different external influences as they build their own identity.
You've got it.
This emphasis on function over structure is why we see children flourish or suffer in all kinds of family types.
Right. The structure itself is just a descriptor, not a predictor. And we have massive diversity today.
The two-parent structures range from the traditional nuclear family to families with step-parents, adoptive parents.
Same-sex couple parents and the increasingly common skip-generation families where grandparents are raising the kids.
And the single-parent structures are just as varied. Single mothers, never married, divorced, separated, widowed single fathers, or a single grandparent alone.
And when we analyze these structures, we absolutely have to apply a cultural nuance. Culture matters immensely in determining support and acceptance.
For example.
Well, in the U.S., the sources specifically note that the cohabiting structure is statistically worse for children than marriage. Now, this is not due to any moral failing of cohabitation.
Right. It's about stability.
It's largely because it carries a much higher incidence of separation, which means less harmony and stability. So it's that functional requirement that's failing.
The lack of harmony and stability is the risk factor, regardless of whether there are one or two adults present. Instability creates that chronic stress.
Exactly. And we also see ethnic norms creating vast differences. Single parenthood, for example, is differentially accepted and supported across various cultures and communities.
So if the culture provides a robust, extended support network for single parents,
Then the cumulative stress on that parent, and subsequently on the child, is drastically reduced compared to an isolated single parent who's lacking resources. Context is everything.
on the topic of specific structural stresses, the research draws particular attention to military families, especially in the context of modern conflicts.
Yeah, the repeated deployment cycles.
Exactly.
This is a really sobering modern case study in cumulative stress. The sources highlight that due to medical and armored advances, the rate of battle deaths for U.S. soldiers deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan is lower than in previous wars.
Which is obviously a good thing.
A very important thing.
But the psychological harm, especially from the repeated cycles of deployment and return, is increasing significantly, particularly for the children of these service members.
And that psychological harm is directly linked to the principle of cumulative stress. The child experiences chronic instability.
They suffer anticipatory anxiety before deployment.
The stress of prolonged separation and role changes while the parent is away.
And then the difficulty of readapting when the service member returns, who is often dealing with their own invisible wounds like PTSD.
Yes, this constant disruption prevents the child from establishing a stable baseline, which makes it extremely challenging to focus on that developmental task of industry. The child's ability to predict and rely on their primary environment is just constantly undermined.
So based on all this data favoring stability and function, what advice do scholars offer to adults regarding commitment and minimizing harm when family changes do happen?
The scholarly advice is sort of twofold. First, there's the preventative measure. Marriage commitments need careful consideration to minimize the risk of divorce.
Basically, couples need to work actively to keep the relationship strong.
Yes, to ensure that vital function of harmony and stability remains intact for the children.
And if divorce, unfortunately, does occur,
Then the immediate focus has to shift to minimizing the destructive element of transition. That's the source of the cumulative stress.
so adults have to minimize major transitions, avoiding unnecessary moves, school changes, or rapid changes in romantic partners in the child's life.
All of that. And they also must work meticulously to maintain the child's relationship with both parents, provided both parents are safe and available.
Why is that so crucial?
That dual relationship is critical for the child's psychological stability, their sense of identity, their self-worth. It ensures they don't feel inferior just because of their family structure alone.
And for this specific 6 to 11-year-old age group, the sources note that schools become incredibly vital.
Oh, absolutely. The school, as part of that non-shared environment, is the critical safe harbor. It is the place where routine, consistent adult expectations and opportunities for industry still exist, even when the home is chaotic.
So the stability from a single teacher or an after-school program,
It can be the decisive factor in a child's resilience during a family breakdown. It can be everything.
okay, we've established that structure matters less than function. So now let's move from the specific examples to the universal risks. We're going to zero in on the two primary factors that almost universally harm children, regardless of what the family structure is or where they live.
Right, the two great destroyers of stability.
Wealth and poverty and high conflict.
When analyzing the impact of poverty, the research demands that we view it through the lens of the family stress model.
So the crucial question isn't just, are they poor?
No. The crucial question to ask about poverty or unemployment or debt is whether or not it increases stress on the adults and how those adults subsequently channel that stress toward the children.
And the research is very clear that it's not simply the absence of money itself that is the harm.
It's the adult's stressful reaction to that poverty that is crucial in determining the effect on the children.
Right.
Precisely. Poverty introduces multiple concurrent stressors: financial precarity, job insecurity, housing instability, increased anxiety about meeting basic needs, and often parents working multiple shifts, leaving less time for quality parenting.
And the family stress model shows that pathway.
It does. Financial hardship leads to parental anxiety or depression, which then translates into inconsistent, irritable, or harsh parenting, and that is what damages the child's development. The stress on the parent becomes stress on the child.
And just like with those other stressors, the effects of poverty are overwhelmingly cumulative.
They are profoundly cumulative, and the sources specifically note that low socioeconomic status, or SES, is especially damaging during middle childhood.
Why specifically this age?
It's crucial because it hits exactly when the child is developing those social comparison skills and that drive for industry.
Can you elaborate on that? How does low SES specifically undermine the industry crisis for a 6 to 11-year-old?
Certainly. Industry requires resources. The child needs opportunities to develop culturally valued skills, whether that's access to tutors, sports equipment, music lessons, or even just reliable internet and a quiet space for homework.
And low SES often means a lack of access to those things.
Right. So when the child compares themselves to their peers, the 8-year-old who has private soccer coaching or the 10-year-old who goes on enriching family trips, the low SES child realizes their lack of resources, and this realization gets internalized as personal inferiority.
So the environmental constraint becomes a self-judgment.
Exactly. And that reframes poverty not just as material lack, but as a direct assault on the psychosocial development of self-worth.
Wow.
And on top of that, poverty often means housing and school instability, which again loops right back to the cumulative stress we discussed. The child never stays in one place long enough to establish the competency and social acceptance needed to combat inferiority.
Okay, so the second major predictor of dysfunction is high conflict within the family.
Right. Regardless of whether that conflict leads to separation or divorce, a functional family has to foster harmony.
And family conflict harms children, especially when the adults fight specifically about child rearing.
Yes. Rules, discipline, which parent is responsible for what. That just undermines the child's trust in the consistency and stability of their emotional and moral environment. They learn to feel unsafe and uncertain about their own behavior.
And it's important to note where these fights are most common. The sources indicate that fights are more frequent in step-families, divorced families, and extended families.
Which is often logistical. I mean, these structures inherently involve more complex co-parenting challenges, blending of rules, negotiating boundaries with non-biological or temporary adults.
But here's the major insight when you analyze the outcomes. While a child's genes might predispose them to emotional sensitivity,
the research confirms that the conflict itself is the main overriding influence on the child's well-being.
so it's the environmental variable that causes the greatest harm.
It trumps the genetic predisposition. So, even if a child is temperamentally easygoing, sustained exposure to high conflict will still cause significant psychological damage because it fundamentally destroys that functional requirement of stability and harmony.
It just models poor emotional regulation.
Exactly. It teaches the child that relationships are based on hostility, and it diverts parental energy away from supporting the child's industry and toward managing adult discord.
And the child might even internalize the conflict, believing they are the cause.
Which just further cements those feelings of inferiority. It's a devastating cycle.
We've established that the influence of the non-shared environment, the world outside the home, is growing rapidly in middle childhood. This means the peer group isn't just supplementary anymore. It takes center stage in defining success and failure. Let's talk about the culture of children.
The culture of children is a fascinating, almost anthropological concept. It's defined as the particular habits, styles, values, and language that reflect the set of rules and rituals characterizing children as distinct from adult society.
This is their secret world.
It is.
The rules, the language, the attitudes, it's a social structure that provides essential independence from adults, which they crave at this stage.
And you see it manifested in their fashion, their unique slang, their attitudes towards authority.
And they're adherence to these peer-dictated rituals of acceptance or rejection. It's their testing ground for self-governance.
And this independence is directly tied to the industry crisis. They need to prove they are competent. And competence is now largely defined by the peer group, not just the parents anymore.
So if they adhere to the peer code, they gain status in industry.
And if they fail, they are often rejected, which leads straight to inferiority.
As their social world expands, the value placed on individual friendships changes dramatically. It becomes far more selective.
It does. School-age children begin to value personal, deep friendship more than just generalized peer acceptance. They want true confidants and allies, not just vague popularity.
And that deep friendship provides enormous psychosocial benefits.
Huge. It leads to psychosocial growth because they learn collaboration, loyalty, perspective-taking, emotional regulation.
And crucially, a strong friendship provides a powerful buffer against psychopathology.
Yes. When the home life is unstable or the school environment is stressing them out, a single strong friend can be a lifeline of stability.
And do the differences between boys and girls' friendships continue through middle childhood? Or do they start to merge?
Oh, they become quite pronounced.
Yeah.
Girls tend to focus on building intimacy. They talk more, they share secrets, and the friendship is often built around deep emotional connection and vulnerability.
Whereas boys,
Boys, in contrast, tend to focus on shared activity and competition. Their friendships are built around active games, shared interests, and challenges, rather than shared vulnerability.
and both forms are valid.
Completely valid, but they fulfill different psychosocial needs.
Okay, so the drive for acceptance remains, but the definition of what makes a child popular in the United States evolves throughout middle childhood.
It does.
And that evolution is a little concerning.
It is. Initially, in the early grades, popular children are defined by positive social traits. They're genuinely kind, trustworthy, cooperative, helpful. They're the social glue of the classroom.
But the research shows that around the transition to fifth grade, the definition of cool broadens significantly.
Yes, it broadens to include traits that prioritize dominance over kindness.
So popularity starts to include being athletic, cool, dominant, arrogant.
And even aggressively confident. This shift occurs as children gain the cognitive capacity to understand social hierarchies and the utility of power.
So they realize that dominance and aggression can be successful strategies for gaining status, even if they aren't morally admirable.
Sadly, yes.
What about the children who are struggling to fit in? The sources categorize unpopular children into 3 distinct groups, and they each face different social challenges.
The first group is the neglected child. They are neither actively liked nor disliked. They simply fly under the social radar.
They're just quiet and unnoticed.
Exactly. And while they lack status, they typically have low levels of distress because they aren't being actively targeted.
Okay, but the second and third groups are actively rejected, and they face much higher emotional costs.
They do. The aggressive rejected child is disliked because they are confrontational, impulsive, hostile, and poor at regulating emotion.
So this is the child who constantly interrupts a game to yell at others, or who reacts violently to perceived slights.
Right. Their rejection is based on their negative, disruptive behavior.
And the third group is the withdrawn, rejected child.
Yes. They are socially timid, anxious, and often shy. They are disliked because they're perceived as awkward, socially inept, or easy targets for teasing.
A classic example being the child who tries to join a group but stands too close, uses bizarre social cues.
Or is easily triggered to cry, which peers then use as an opportunity for further ridicule. Both aggressive rejected and withdrawn rejected children struggle immensely with their sense of industry.
That intense focus on rejection brings us to the most dangerous and damaging aspect of peer interaction: bullying. Let's define it precisely to understand its mechanism.
Bullying is defined as the repeated, systematic efforts to inflict harm through physical, verbal, or social attack on a weaker person.
The key words there are repeated and systematic.
Yes, meaning it is an ongoing pattern designed to exploit a recognized power imbalance. It's not just a single mean act.
And the types of bullying have evolved well beyond the physical.
Oh, definitely. We categorize them into 4 key types.
Right.
Physical, which is hitting, kicking, property damage. Then verbal teasing, name-calling, threats.
And then relational?
Relational, which is the very subtle but devastating attacks that destroy peer acceptance and friendship. Things like deliberate exclusion, rumor spreading, or social sabotage.
And of course, cyber.
Using electronic means, which extends the attack 24/7, it follows them home. And relational bullying is often the most damaging in middle childhood because peer acceptance is paramount.
And then there's that particularly complicated figure, the bully victim.
Right. The bully victim is someone who attacks others and who is attacked as well.
They're also called a provocative victim.
Yes. They often possess poor emotional regulation and social skills, doing things that inadvertently elicit bullying. They might be hyperactive, overly talkative, consistently annoying,
Or they might engage in petty retaliation, like stealing a bully's pencil.
which just invites a larger, more aggressive response. They're trapped in a vicious cycle of aggression and victimization.
Let's look at the causes and consequences. The causes of bullying are multi-layered, aren't they?
They are, ranging from potential genetic predispositions and brain abnormalities affecting impulse control to the parenting environment modeling aggression or showing indifference, and the influence of peers who actively normalize or encourage aggression for social status.
And the consequences for the victims are significant and long-lasting.
Devastating. Impaired social understanding, lower school achievement, because anxiety makes it impossible to focus on the work of industry relationship difficulties, and a high incidence of depression and anxiety.
It's a direct attack on their sense of industry.
It is. Bullying targets the child's burgeoning sense of competence and seeks to replace it with profound, inescapable inferiority.
So if we want to eliminate bullying, the sources offer specific, effective strategies. And it's not about isolating the problem children.
No, that doesn't work. It's about cultural change.
Old school approach.
Successful intervention absolutely must involve the whole school, not just the identified bullies. It has to be a comprehensive cultural effort involving teachers, staff, parents, and students to change the social norms that allow bullying to thrive.
And timing matters.
The research also confirms that intervention is more effective in the earlier grades, before 5th grade, when those aggressive, dominance-based norms start to solidify.
And you have to check if it's working.
And finally, yes, continuous, rigorous evaluation of results is critical to ensure the programs are actually changing behavior, not just completing a checklist.
Okay, so as the child enters and progresses through middle childhood, their ability to reason about right and wrong grows exponentially.
It does.
This is really the prime time for moral development, as their exposure to diverse peer groups forces them to think beyond just basic obedience.
Children in this age group demonstrate some really impressive moral skills. They're adept at making moral judgments, and critically, they're beginning to differentiate between universal principles and conventional norms.
Explain that difference.
Universal principles are things that are always inherently wrong, like intentionally hurting someone or stealing. Conventional norms are the arbitrary rules established for social order, like standing in line or raising your hand before speaking.
And that differentiation is a huge cognitive leap, isn't it? It shows they understand the intent behind the rule.
It does. They understand that breaking a conventional norm like standing up during silent reading might result in a timeout, but breaking a universal principle, like punching another student, is a far more serious moral transgression, regardless of the consequence.
So what are the key influences on this moral development during the middle years?
The three major influences noted are peer culture, personal experience, especially experiences of injustice, and, perhaps most powerfully, empathy.
So they're developing ability to step into someone else's shoes.
And understand psychological harm, not just physical harm, that deepens their moral calculus and moves them away from purely self-interested reasoning.
This expansion of moral thought creates a really interesting tension, though. The child has to reconcile the pro-social values taught at home with the unspoken, often competitive rules of the peer group.
Yes. The explicit pro-social values among 6 to 11-year-old are generally aligned with adult expectations. Caring for close family members, cooperating with other children, not hurting anyone intentionally.
Those are the explicit, learned values that foster societal harmony.
Right, but the pure culture introduces a new set of often competing values, the unspoken rules that prioritize group loyalty and secrecy over adult principles.
What are those rules?
Things like protect your friends, don't tell adults what is happening, the anti-snitching code, and don't be too different from your peers.
And that creates a moral conflict.
A huge one. Imagine a child witnesses a friend cheating on a test. The adult pro-social value says, cheating is wrong, you must be honest. But the peer value says, protect your friends, don't snitch, and don't make yourself an outsider by being too different. This conflict between loyalty and honesty is a significant moral test that's unique to this stage.
How does the sophistication of their moral judgment change throughout this period? Does it get more complex?
Throughout middle childhood, moral judgment becomes significantly more comprehensive. They move beyond a simple assessment of damage or consequence.
So they start to take into account psychological harm as well as physical harm.
Yes, and they weigh intentions as well as consequences. This is a huge shift.
Meaning if a peer breaks a toy.
The child will judge the act differently if it was done maliciously versus accidentally, even if the consequence a broken toy. is the same. They're now judging the actor's mind, not just the physical outcome.
And what does current research suggest about the best, most practical way for parents or educators to foster this moral advancement?
This is a powerful, applicable insight that goes against the old notion of just telling a child what is right.
It's not about lecturing them.
No. Current research suggests that simply raising moral issues and letting children talk about them may advance morality, not immediately, but soon afterward,
Why is discussion so effective?
because it forces the child to articulate their reasoning, to integrate those complex factors like intention and psychological impact, and crucially, to hear differing viewpoints. It helps them move from simple, concrete consequences, I'll get punished, to abstract, reasoned principles like it was wrong because it hurt his feelings and broke his trust.
So time spent in conversation, rather than just imposing rules, helps them think more deeply about moral values.
It's the most effective tool we have.
We have to anchor this discussion by addressing Lawrence Kohlberg and his famous levels of moral thought, which remain highly influential.
Plain two.
Kohlberg proposed that morality develops through 3 levels of reasoning. Let's start with the first, pre-conventional.
Pre-conventional moral reasoning is the lowest level, typically found in younger children. It emphasizes rewards and punishments. Morality is purely external and self-interested.
So a child reasons, I won't hit my brother because I'll get a timeout.
Or, I will share my toy because I'll get praised. The morality of the action is judged solely by its direct consequences for the self.
Then the second level, which many children transition into during middle childhood, is conventional moral reasoning.
Right. Conventional moral reasoning emphasizes social rules and conformity. The child reasons, I won't do that because it's against the school rule, or what would people think if I broke this promise?
So morality here is determined by adhering to societal expectations, laws, and norms to maintain social order and be seen as a good person.
Yes, and this level explains the power of that peer code we were talking about.
And finally, the highest level, post-conventional moral reasoning.
Post-conventional moral reasoning is the highest, and is often not reached until adulthood, if at all. It emphasizes universal moral principles that supersede mere rules like justice, equity, human dignity, or inherent human rights.
So a person at this stage might break a law because they believe the law is fundamentally unjust.
Precisely.
In assessing his work, the sources confirm that Kohlberg was correct about one big thing. Children use their intellectual abilities to justify moral actions. The way they reason truly matters.
That's his great enduring strength. However, his theory has some significant criticisms that are relevant to our discussion on middle childhood.
Okay, what are they?
First, it notably ignored the influence of culture and gender, potentially placing an undue focus on traditionally male, westernized concepts of justice over, say, communal responsibility or care ethics.
Right.
Crucially, for this age group, it also failed to include family influence adequately. It assumes peer interaction is the only driver.
Which we know isn't true.
And finally, it did not fully address the fundamental differences between child and adult morality, failing to adequately account for those conflicting peer versus pro-social values we see at this stage.
This has been a deeply insightful look into the 6 to 11-year-old world. We started with the intense internal pressure of Erikson's crisis. The shift from defining competence internally to relying so heavily on external social comparison to define their sense of industry.
We recognize that the child's success relies heavily on stability, noting that family function is far more important than structure.
And that the gradual, cumulative impact of minor stresses, the chronic, low-grade instability of frequent moves or parental anxiety, can be far more devastating than an isolated event.
And this chronic stress directly sabotages their ability to achieve industry.
And finally, we saw the increasing power of the external world, moving from supportive friendships to the complexity and danger of dominance-based popularity and bullying dynamics, all while watching their moral judgment mature so rapidly to include psychological harm and intention.
We establish that the influence of the non-shared environment friends, schools, that emerging peer culture, increases significantly during middle childhood, giving rise to their own secret rules and moral dilemmas.
Right.
So if children are developing this separate, powerful peer culture and relying less on the shared family environment for validation, we have to ask, what subtle shifts in our own behavior might best support their growing moral judgment?
Knowing that time and talking can actually advance morality, how do we create the necessary space for them to process their complex moral struggles without just imposing our adult answers?
And how do we help them integrate their new knowledge of intention and psychological harm into their growing identity of industry? That conversation, that's the final essential work of this stage.